I am Deidré Wallace, a relationship and corporate therapist. The clue is always in the gaze. Point 3. Watching the shocking Little John video taught me just how quickly a child can lose trust in a parent. So, years ago, when I volunteered in a children's home, I was always terribly saddened by the toddlers who would grab any stranger by the leg whilst looking up longingly, hoping that at last this would be the person that would take them home and give them the love they so yearned for. Others, however, forlornly just sat around, having given up all hope. Years later, I realized why. During my training as a relationship therapist, I watched a video which profoundly moved me and affected how I work. It was created by Joyce and James Robertson. Joyce Robertson was a student who went to work with Anna Freud, and in 1965, her and her husband worked with John Bowlby at the Tavistock Centre in London in the UK, observing infants. Joyce Robertson made a major contribution to our understanding of the way children cope when separated from their parents. She and her husband went on to make a series of documentaries recording the behavior of children in hospitals and in foster care. This was because in those days, parents were only allowed to visit their babies or children once a week, and sometimes not at all. This created so much distress for the mothers, and Joyce wanted to know how this impacted on the children as well. Initially, only professionals were allowed to see the films as they were so disturbing. The films are sometimes still used for teaching about separation, attachment, and child development. It took me a while to finally locate the videos. There are 5 rather expensive videos, and they can be bought from Concord Media, 22 Hines Road, Ipswich, Suffolk, also in the UK. The video I saw as a student was of a 17-month little boy called John. He was filmed in 1969 for 9 days whilst his mother was in hospital having her second baby. The father couldn't look after his son due to work commitments, so a family doctor recommended that little John be placed in the local residential nursery. During John's entire stay at the nursery, he was filmed. Sadly, what was filmed was the emotional disintegration of a child who hadn't quite understood that his mummy would return after giving birth to his sibling, that is. As a result, little John felt devastated and utterly abandoned by his mother, even though his father would visit him after work each day. Why the video was shocking was watching the distressed Johnny trying to get the attention of the carers. But because there were different carers at different times, on different shifts, there was no continuity. And as a result, the carers had no clue or any idea what was happening. Those days, less was known with regards to the emotional needs of a child. And because little Johnny wasn't as feisty as all the others, his attempt at getting a carer's attention failed. Initially, he tries again and again, but we watch how he slowly gives up. Unable to appeal to carers, he retreats into a corner of the nursery and sits there on his own. Yet every day when his daddy visits him, he would run to the cupboard where his little jacket was kept, and he'd open the door and grab his jacket, and then see him running excitedly to his daddy and placing the little jacket's collar firmly in the daddy's hands, and he tries to close his daddy's fingers around the collar of his jacket whilst begging his daddy to please take him home. Sadly, the little John's daddy did not understand his need, so he leaves, patting little Johnny on the head. And you see little John standing there sad and utterly bereft. And this goes on every day as little John tries to communicate his need. But then, and what is utterly dismaying, is when finally his mother appears to collect her son, having now had her second baby. As the camera turns and focuses on John's face, his expression becomes printed onto the brain of anyone having watched the video. It is clearly evident from little John's deadpan and expressionless gaze that any trust he may have had in those 9 days been completely annihilated. Little John's look of utter rage and complete disconnection is still with me to this day, especially and sadly when I have recognized it in some of my clients. And if I remember correctly, they monitored John all the way into adulthood and found that he still had trust issues. This because once trust is broken, it is very hard, if ever, to repair. There was, of course, an outcry of viewers asking why the camera person hadn't done something. Well, if they had, I suppose we wouldn't have gained this valuable knowledge. And thankfully, all these findings encouraged hospitals and various institutions to change the parental visiting rights and so on. The Robertsons also worked with John Bowlby, who developed the understanding of what he called the attachment theory. You may have heard of this. He observed that usually a child attaches themselves to at least one main carer who is able to meet all their emotional and physical needs. This person has to be available both physically and emotionally for the child, to be there to gaze attentively, to give the child the attention they need to feel safe and secure. And in the absence of this sort of care, the child will anxiously search for an attachment figure, or else despair sets in, and as a result can become angry, detached, and withdrawn. However, we cannot generalize. We cannot say that all children left in the nursery landed up with trust issues. This is because children cope differently. And as I mentioned earlier, little John wasn't as feisty, possibly, as all the others. On the other hand, a parent may also think they know their children well. But some adults report that their parents' assumptions were sometimes wrong. In other words, we need to be careful. Some children are more sensitive and may find certain situations hard to handle. Not every child is the same. However, throughout history, people have been abandoned and forced to endure indescribable situations, and sometimes abandonment happens under our very noses. However, abandonment isn't a new thing. It's been happening for ages, and some don't even realize that they're doing it or that it has been done to them. Either way, abandonment, trust, or betrayal issues, and you may have some examples of your own, can start really early on. Some may think we forget, but in point 2, in the last video, I explained how even an adopted child can continue grieving the loss of its mother right up into adulthood, and even longer, as we know from all the people searching for a birth mother or their birth parents. And in reality, what happens to us in the early years can have a profound effect with regards what kind of adults we become, what relationships we will attract or choose, and whether we will have trust or intimacy issues. But let's pause here for a moment. I wonder if any of you have experienced this, losing trust due to feeling abandoned. However, abandonment can take various forms too. It can result from being lied to or feeling betrayed, and so on. Also, does this information relate to any of your patterns of behavior, intimacy or trust issues, not being able to trust your partner, attracting people who leave you, not getting your needs met, or maybe giving too much, hoping a partner will stay, and so on? Via this video series, I encourage you, therefore, to start a journal so you can write down what you have learned about yourself. This may help you understand yourself and your knee-jerk reactions a lot better. Thank you.